Hello, I'm Katie Jeffries. Thank you for joining us here on First Coast News Plus. I'm excited to talk to you today about cold cases. So for about 7 years now, I have been leading Unsolved, which is our cold case series here at First Coast News. And it's such an important issue and one that we're going to be talking about for probably about the next half hour. So according to the Murder Accountability Project in the United States, since 1980, there have been more than 733,000 homicides and more than 285,000 of those cases remain unsolved. So what can we do about that? How can we advocate for those cases so these people do not get forgotten? That brings me to our guest today, and that would be Ryan Backmann. He is the founder of Project Cold Case. It is an organization, though, based here in Jacksonville, a national organization. So Ryan, thank you for joining us here on First Coast News Plus, and we would love to hear more about Project Cold Case.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie. Obviously this is a near and dear issue to my heart. And I remember having conversations with you when you first started this Unsolved series, and we have helped along the way and love to see the growth and all the awareness that you've brought. For those that don't know about Project Cold Case, we just celebrated our 10th year in existence. We are based right here in Jacksonville, Florida. We started in January 2015. For the mere goal of providing advocacy and awareness for families of unsolved homicides. And I got started doing this and wanted to start this organization because my own father, Cliff Backmann, was a victim of homicide in Jacksonville in 2009, and his case, unfortunately, still to this day remains unsolved. And so, like my family being thrust into this world of criminal justice and the judicial process, I had a lot of questions. I stumbled a lot. I really struggled with understanding the processes. And there wasn't a lot of people around that knew and were helping guide me through that journey. Not only was I grieving, obviously, the loss of my father, but then I was trying to navigate this world that I only knew through the television. I had only experienced crime and the criminal justice system through TV shows, and found out real quickly that real life doesn't really mimic those shows, and it's a lot more complicated than that. And so I started Project Cold Case as a way to help other families navigate that journey.
And going back to your dad's case, so it was 2009, October of 2009. He was at a construction site, correct? Just
Right.
off of JTB near Belford. Can you tell us
Yes.
more about what happened?
Yeah, he was a construction worker by trade, construction superintendent. And so Monday through Friday, he had his superintendent job. But then my stepmom was suffering from terminal cancer at that time as well. And so he would pick up side jobs on the weekends to make a few extra dollars. And he had picked up a side job on a Saturday morning right there on Bonneville Road, JTB and 95 area, where during the week it was a very bustling time. I mean, remember, this was 15 years ago. It's grown up a lot, since then. But at that time, still, during the week, it was very busy. On the weekends, not so much. And he was at this newly renovated office building by himself, literally vacuuming up drywall dust when somebody walked into the building, shot him, took his wallet, and then fled the scene. My dad was able to call 911, give a very, very, very brief description of the man that had just shot him, and then lost consciousness on the phone with the dispatcher before rescue arrived, and was pronounced deceased at Shands UF Health.
And as you were kind of going through this and his case suddenly, I'm sure you get fewer and fewer updates. Time is going by. How hard was it to get Project Cold Case kind of off the ground to become an advocate for cases like your dad's?
The history there is you really do just expect every day to get the phone call when you're in that position from police saying, we've made an arrest. This is what happened. And that's not really how it works. The investigators are investigating. Part of their job description is not to call you every day and fill you in on what happened. But that's what you want as a family member. And often it's kind of what you feel you need is some kind of information. Everything has been stripped of you, all your control, all your power. is gone. You have no idea what's going on in this investigation. And so that was hard for me. And I developed a very good relationship with the lead detective on my dad's case, and I could reach out to him. But what started out as regular communication then went to, once a month I would reach out to him. And then within a year and a half, he called me and asked me to meet him. And I thought that was like good news. I thought he was going to tell me that they had had a break in the case. And instead, he sat me down and told me that they had exhausted all the leads and tips, and my dad's case was now cold and what they would call here in Jacksonville administratively suspended. And that meant that nobody was looking for the guy that had shot and killed my dad anymore. And that was a really, really difficult time for me. I had already gone through the motions in my mind that what if one day that, they don't find him? What if they never find him? But I'd never thought, what if they stop looking? And so that caught me off guard. And so, in this transition period, in that first year of my dad's murder, I started going to a nonprofit that, no longer exists, unfortunately, but Compassionate Families was founded here in Jacksonville in the late 90s after Jeff Mitchell had been shot and killed at Terry Parker High School in the earlier 90s. And that family had started an organization that helped families that were going through this process. And so I started going to support meetings there. I started volunteering there and became a victim. They asked me if I would, take a job there as a victim advocate, and I did. And so I spent, 4 years after, my dad's murder as a victim advocate for families that have been impacted by violence. And I learned through that experience, but we served any family, no matter if it was solved or unsolved. And there were also a couple of other organizations in town, the Justice Coalition and Families of Slain Children, that were also offering services to families. So I really felt in that moment that I could shift my focus to unsolved, because that was kind of the cases that were slipping through the cracks. But I was meeting these families through my advocacy, and I knew we existed, and I knew we were all having these similar struggles. So in 2015, I founded Project Cold Case to more specifically focus on those families and their more unique needs. Because, unfortunately, even as Katie, now, especially like you pull these old files, you start doing research on these old cases, and there might be a paragraph in the Times-Union from 1990 that says, unidentified victim found shot on the sidewalk. And then maybe, a few days later, they say unidentified victim identified, or victim found identified. And finding this old footage, and you've told me the stories about searching through your own archives here to try to find.
Deeply challenging.
Yeah. And so, you can imagine how that makes families of these victims feel. And we have over 1,500 unsolved murders in Jacksonville alone, in Duval County. So that's a lot of families that, don't know what's going on, don't know the right process, who to call, who to ask. I know we're going to talk a little bit about some of the cases you've covered and some of the families that we've helped, but, simple cases like Annie Mae Ernest from, last year, that was a call to our office. And our advocacy, part of our advocacy is reach out to JSO, call the cold case unit, ask for an update. The family did that. JSO pulled the case file, reviewed the case, and ultimately resolved it. The suspect had been dead for a long time, but we're able to close that case, clear that case, tell the family what happened. And, that family had clearly felt like they had been forgotten over the years. And just through that one phone call, finally felt like people cared again. And that's our goal.
And I thought what was neat, too, especially when we first kind of met and started talking, you were creating a database. Because at that point, there was no nationwide database for cold cases. It was, each agency had their own cold cases, but there was no place where you could go and truly search, well, show me the cold cases for Duval County. Show me the cold cases for, a county in Georgia. And I thought that was really interesting how you guys brought that all together.
Yeah, and that was another one of those stories where you really start to feel alone and alienated, and then you go, well, I've met a few other families that have an unsolved case, so I can't be the only one. So I did a records request of JSO, back in 2012 or 2013, and I asked for all the unsolved homicides, and I received a spreadsheet with over 1,100 victims on it, and I was shocked. Like, nobody could tell me how many cases there were. until we did that records request and until we asked. And then I was floored because I thought, we're all in our own little worlds here, struggling and suffering, and we could come together and we could be a collective voice and maybe create some change and some accountability and some awareness. And so, it was like, well, wait, now we could do this beyond just Jacksonville and start doing records requests with other law enforcement agencies. And we were finding as we were doing those records requests that they didn't know how many cases they had either. And some of them had some cases on their website, some of them didn't.
Right.
But it kind of generated a lot of agencies starting to take notice. Because we have to ask them tough questions like, well, what do you do when somebody calls and says,
how do you access the records?
How do you access the records?
Do you have the records?
If somebody calls in a tip, what do you do? And they're like, well, we just walk in and go, does anybody remember this case? And we're like, no. So it's been, I mean, I said we're celebrating 10 years, a decade of this work. And it has been a lot of those little stories that have really created and impacted larger change, which is always an amazing thing to see and something I'm very proud of.
Let's talk about some of the success stories here. One of the ones that I feel like we heard about early on with your organization was the Freddy Farah case, which is the oldest cold case to be solved in the Jacksonville area. For those unfamiliar with the case, it centers around the victim, Freddy Farah. He was murdered on May 22nd of 1974 during a robbery at the store he owned here in Jacksonville. He had 4 children, and for more than 4 decades, this case sat cold until a New Orleans street performer named Johnny Miller was actually arrested after fingerprints at the scene linked back to him. And in court, he could have faced life in prison, but the Farah family showed him mercy, giving him the state attorney's office the blessing to allow him to plead guilty to a lesser charge after he sat down, kind of answered their questions, and then he was able to actually walk free with time served. So just an incredible story, but walk me back through, because I believe you kind of helped get this ball rolling to help them kind of re-look into this case.
Yeah, actually it's Bobby Farah, Freddie's son, that was the key to this whole thing. And he's an amazing friend. We've become very close over the years. But he just ran into the former cold case sergeant, Dan Jansen, who used to have on a lot of your unsolved interviews and stories. And they bumped into each other at a Farah family restaurant over on the South Bank. And Sergeant at the time, Jansen, didn't know that Bobby's dad was an unsolved cold case. And Sergeant Jansen was in charge of the homicide team that that investigated my dad's case. So there's all these connections that are kind of interesting. But Bobby said, my dad was murdered 40 plus years ago. It's never been solved. Dan decided he would take a look at it, back to the office, kind of told Bobby, look, don't hold your breath, but we'll take a look. And they quickly, our partnership with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office at that time, and still somewhat to today, was linking families to each other. So if they called me, we refer them to JSO. If they called JSO, they would refer them to us. And that was kind of how it happened. Dan referred Bobby to Project Cold Case and gave him my phone number. Bobby and I started connecting, bonding over having both lost our fathers to unsolved murder. And then ultimately those fingerprints, again, we think of cold cases having to be solved by investigative genetic genealogy or the latest DNA testing and forensics. But those fingerprint tests were advancing technologically as well, and they were able to solve it. Unfortunately, what happened was the key witness passed away while the suspect was incarcerated awaiting trial, and the state was not going to be able to present the evidence with those fingerprints. And so they didn't have really a choice but to either drop the charges completely or work a plea deal. And they sat down with the family and talked about it. And part of that agreement was that he would meet with the family and explain what happened. So it's not, and Bobby says this all the time, because, people want, everybody has a different view of justice, and you want people to be held accountable, and you want them to serve time for the crimes that they committed. And, the Farah family didn't really get that. I mean, he spent less than a year in county jail before he was released. And but Bobby always says, it's not the outcome that we wanted or hoped for, as far as the punishment, but all he had ever asked for was he wanted to know who did it and why. And Bobby got those answers. And the rest of his family that may not have been enough for all of them. Everybody kind of grieves and resolves those feelings in their own way. But for Bobby, that was very important to him.
And let's go to another case here, Valerie Ames. This one, an arrest was announced just last year, but the crime itself happened in 1996. Valerie Ames was stabbed to death at a Riverside apartment. She had 2 young daughters at the time. There were more than 24 pieces of evidence that were going to be retested for DNA when we covered this back in 2018 in our Unsolved series. And then last year, the announcement came that Jerry Phillips was taken into custody on sexual battery and second-degree murder charges. He has pled not guilty. This still needs to go through the court system, but an arrest in this case, was huge news.
Absolutely. You met this family at our office to do an original interview. And what Project Cold Case does, and what kind of separates us, is we're long-term support. We have been working with Valerie Ames' family for years before this arrest was made, and we had connected them to you to offer awareness. We had shared stories on our website and social media pages, and we were there when the families would call. So when we got word that an arrest was made, kind of the advocacy part of this, what is different for Project Cold Case than, we're not investigators. We weren't actually physically doing the investigative work, was they were going to do a press conference at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. So we were able to invite the family to our office because one daughter lives out of state and the other one lives out of town. So they could come to our office early, have, air conditioning, water, snacks, a place to rest and relax. I personally would escort them over to the sheriff's office and help them, assist them through.
Walk them through what that was going to be like as a press conference.
And where to go, what door to go in, who to ask for, all of the things that they had no idea. Where to park. We could offer them free parking. Little things like that people don't think about, but that's the advocacy side of it. And then, of course, on the way over, the family asked me to stand up and read a statement from Valerie's mom, who was still alive, but because of her health, was not able to make the trip for the press conference. And so I consider that, obviously a great honor for a family to ask me to stand up and share their words in that moment where, they've waited decades for these answers, and now this process is moving forward, and they're getting those answers.
Another case that you did such great advocacy work for was the Sad Kaa case, and this one had so many, just twists and turns. He was murdered May 17th of 1999. A man and a woman attacked Sad Kaa and his wife at their home, and they tied up Ms. Kaa. They stabbed Mr. Kaa to death. And eventually, a man was arrested. He was actually a detective, William Bear, with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and the arrest report said that he had been looking into Mr. Kaa back in 1999, discovered that he kept money in the house, and that's when they hatched a plan to rob him. But it was just, I remember when this came out, this was wild. And you had been in contact with, of course, his family to kind of help be an advocate, because you knew this case, especially with the details of it, a detective being taken into custody, this was going to be huge news. There was going to be a lot of outlets reaching out to the family.
Absolutely. And this family was very, very private. And this is another one that we had been working with for 3 or 4 years before the arrest was made. This is, our work is long-term advocacy that is not fancy and sexy. And, a lot of times it's just listening to people on the phone. A lot of times it's offering up a spotlight or connection to media to raise some awareness. And so we maintain that contact. And then when this happened, and ultimately, with who the offender was, a very private family that did not want to be the focus. I mean, if you remember, they didn't want to participate in the media spotlights that were done, a few months before.
They just wanted to give a statement.
They just wanted to get a statement. So I helped them craft a statement and then provided that to everybody. And so those are the things that we kind of do behind the scenes. And you're right, because this was a former JSO officer, it was big news, and everybody wanted a part of it. And we still get, honestly, contact from TV production companies that want to feature this this particular case. And, every time I ask the family, not only do they not want to participate, quite honestly, they don't want the TV production companies to do these stories, and they have asked them not to. And some of them have, been understanding and declined to move forward, and some haven't, and that's kind of something that people don't really think about, This was a cultural thing too. This family was Syrian. There were many things that were going on within that family and how to cope and how to grieve and how to support each other without wanting the cameras in their face, without wanting to be on a Netflix documentary. A lot of our families would love that opportunity, but this family didn't. So we tried to be respectful of that and kind of be a little bit of a gatekeeper for them and let them know every opportunity that's out there, and then respect their wishes if they choose not to pursue them. And this is another one that we still maintain contact with the family.
That kind of brings me into our next kind of topic, the true crime genre. And I know this has been something that you feel pretty passionate about. Obviously, there's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of shows, documentaries. What are your thoughts on people making true crime entertainment?
Yeah, I think we have to recognize it as that. True crime is a genre of entertainment. Real crime is what my family experienced. It's what the Kawaf family and the Farah family and Ames family and all these other families have experienced. And there is a distinct difference. And a lot of families want and are desperate to have their loved one's story told in a podcast, on a network.
They want the awareness.
They need the awareness. They want the awareness. Unfortunately, a lot of times we associate our loved one's value with how much the public wants to consume it, right? Mm-hmm. And so the families that got zero publicity, they always feel like their loved one lacks the value of a Jean Bonnet or somebody that constantly gets the story told over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So, I've experienced this both, personally and seen it a lot professionally. And this is what I have taken away from it. True crime consumers, the people that listen to the podcast, the people that watch the shows, are almost never doing it maliciously. They are curious. They want to help. They want to hear and learn these stories. They are not the problem. The problem is there are some unethical content creators, true crime content creators, that don't ask for family permission, don't contact the family, don't actually share up-to-date, accurate information.
They over-embellish.
They over-embellish. They sensationalize. And that can be damaging to a family that has already experienced, the worst kind of trauma and loss imaginable. So, what we ask the public to do is not stop consuming true crime as entertainment, but hold those creators accountable. And if somebody is doing something against a family's wishes, we heard a lot about it with the Dahmer Netflix documentary.
Yes, yeah.
The families were never contacted, had no input. Mm-hmm. The only way to stop that is to stop consuming it, because if they don't have viewers, if they don't have listeners, and they don't have advertisers, then they don't have money. Then they're going to have to conform to a more ethical form of content creation, which we know is possible because you do it, and because there are podcasts out there, and there are production companies that do take that step to make sure that the families are not harmed while trying to create that awareness for them.
How do you think content creators should navigate the ethics of it? Because it is hard. I mean, you want to create something that people will watch because it'll give them that awareness, but you don't want to re-victimize people. How do you think they should navigate the ethics?
I think you do a really good job of it, Katie, and maybe you can share how you do it. But there are certain things, you're never going to get it always right, all the way right every time. And there may be information that needs to be shared in a story, and the family may not want that information shared, and there is a balance there of not sensationalizing it, not focusing on it, but sometimes that's really, really important. Mm-hmm. And so I think there is a balance there, and knowing when you're working directly with families, like, you have to just communicate and explain. Like, I can't tell the story and leave that part out.
Right. I can be sensitive to this part. I understand that's painful, but this is an important piece probably into the whole story.
Exactly. And I think, for families, there's also a difference between, want, and need. Sometimes we don't want that whole story told, or sometimes we want something left out, but that's not, that's an emotional plea, and we know that it needs to be shared, and so I think, but taking the time to just have the conversation is the bulk of the battle. You let a family know, look, this is what we have discovered. We can't leave this part out, but how can we tell it so that it's less harmful to you and less hurtful? And I think families will at least appreciate the fact that you're letting them have a say. Again, when I talked earlier about the control being stripped from us, sometimes it's just that communication and being able to have the conversation that is half the battle.
And I've come to realize, I'm like, at least telling families that it's coming. Like, you can offer them to be a part of it, but at least letting them know this is going to air. You might see commercials on TV for it, so at least they know it's coming. Is a big thing too.
Yep.
You have Missing Adults Day coming up here in February. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so anybody that's been in Jacksonville for any period of time knows the John Rowan case and Mark Degner and Brian Hayes, two boys that went missing from Paxson almost exactly 20 years ago. The anniversary of their disappearance is coming up February 10th, so right around the corner. And those two families have come together for the last 14, 15 years and hosted a Missing Adult Day that you see there on your screen. And it's really a way to honor and remind the community that these individuals are still missing. They are not all criminal cases where it's unsolved homicide. It is believed that, John Rowan's case is, but the family does not believe that in the Degner and Hayes situation. So it's a way for people to bring that awareness and let others know, like, be on the lookout for these people. They may be distressed. They may not, they may be living on the streets. They may have a dependency issue or a mental health issue, but they may still be around. And those families are desperate to have a conversation with them and know that they are okay. And so the families have asked me to kind of step in and help co-organize this event as they get older and as they look to pass that on and allow it to keep going. And so we have agreed, and I've asked you to MC the event for us this year.
Happy to do it. And
excited to have you there. And it was just a natural fit with all of your work on Unsolved, and you just did a whole series, on missing. So we wanted to make sure that those families knew and were invited. We ask all the families to bring a picture. If they send me a picture, I'll print it out. And then you can stand there with your loved one. The media will be there, and they always grab a family or two and tell the story. So it's a great opportunity. It's at City Hall in the atrium on February 21st at 11 a.m. And the public is invited. Everyone is invited.
And what I've learned with missing adults that I found so challenging when I was interviewing the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was, an adult, if you're an adult, you can get up and leave. You don't have to tell people where you go. And that kind of hampers some of these cases because you don't know, like, did this person just walk off and leave and just didn't communicate, or did something tragic happen? And it's like that limbo can put the case in such a stalemate. It seems like.
And with the families, it's the scientific term is ambiguous loss, because it's this loss and you don't know if it's grief, because you don't know if they're still alive or dead, and you don't know where they are. And when dealing with grief, which we deal with every day at our office, we find that there's just these added layers of complexity. Everybody grieves no matter who they lose, but if it's violent, that adds a layer of complexity. If it's unsolved, that adds a layer of complexity. If you don't know that your loved one is alive or dead, it's very, very traumatic and devastating in a physiological and emotional way. And so, again, these families need to know that they're not alone and need to turn to each other for support, because no one knows that loss like somebody that has experienced it. And so we want them to feel welcomed and loved and encouraged to support each other and provide them this space to do that.
And a case that has gotten national attention, I believe it was on the program Cold Justice, that you were also a part of, the Tyvon Whitford case out of Putnam County, June 9th, 2007. Tyvon Whitford, she was pregnant, a mother of a 5-year-old son as well. She lived in the Hawthorne area. She was also a corrections officer and was killed. There were 2 911 calls that night, one from Tyvon and then the other one from her boyfriend when he arrived at the home. But the program was featured on Cold Justice. Tell me how that came about.
Yeah.
How you facilitated that.
These moments in life that you don't seem important, and then next thing you know, you're friends with Kelly Siegler on the Cold Justice Show, and when people have a passion for helping other people, it's similar to your and my friendship that has blossomed over the years, and we know we're passionate about this. We know we're dedicated to this, and we find each other, and then we help each other, and we help others through our network, and Kelly and her crew on Cold Justice have reached out to me regularly. Do you have any families that want, well, all of our families want to be on Cold Justice. Do we have any law enforcement partners that are willing
to go on too?
To go on to it, which is always the hard part. But in this case, and we didn't facilitate that, somehow they got in touch with, that's Putnam County, I think, and they got in touch with those detectives, and they were doing it. But the family of Tyvon Whitford, we had been working with her, again, for years, long-term support. And so they called us and asked us if we would come down while they were doing the filming and participate. And they shared what we did with the Cold Justice production team. And they interviewed us. We were really behind the scenes on the whole thing, but they did interview us, and it didn't make the episode, but they had like a little extras feature.
There.
We were there. It's on their website. There's like an extras feature where they talk about Project Cold Case. But yeah, there we are. That's Sarah from my office, and Kelly and the detectives from Putnam County, and you saw Tyvon's mom there, Dale, a few minutes ago with us. Wonderful family, absolutely. Every time we talk to them, that case, on both Cold Justice and the Putnam County Sheriff's Office believe they know who did it. But the state attorney's office is doing some further digging. They have not been prepared to charge anybody in that case, which is a really hard place for families to be. My dad's case is a whodunit case. Mm-hmm. I can't look at somebody and be mad at them. I don't run into them at the grocery store and know what they did. I don't see them on the sidewalk. But there are a lot of families out there that the suspect is known, but there's not enough evidence to actually prosecute and charge. Mm-hmm. And that, again, adds a layer of complexity that you just really can't understand unless you have experienced it.
So how can people be an advocate for cold cases? I know that you tried to have some legislation done last year, which unfortunately didn't go through, but how can people advocate for cold cases in their communities?
Yeah, well, being supportive of organizations like Project Cold Case and series like Unsolved, sharing that information, I know everybody wants to be a desktop detective and wants to offer up the clue that is going to resolve the case. That rarely is helpful when you're sharing the information or commenting on the information. It's unless you have specific information, and in that case, I would encourage you to call Crime Stoppers.
Right. Go to the professionals.
Go to the professionals. But sharing those stories and the comments that I see where people offer their support, their condolences, their prayers to the family, that means a lot. I mean, there are families out there that feel like nobody cares. And when you post on social media and somebody comments and says, shared in Baker County, and somebody else says, this is devastating, I'm so sorry for your loss. Those are little things that everybody can do. It doesn't cost a penny, mm-hmm. and it really impacts families and shows them that the community is rallying around them and supportive. And, that legislation we tried to pass was kind of trying to push law enforcement's hand a little bit to be accountable. And my understanding is that legislation is going forward again this year. Okay. I requested they remove my dad's name. My dad's name was a part of it. Last year was the Backmann
Decker Act, I think.
Yeah, Backmann Decker, Marilyn Decker down in South Florida was the other victim. And it was a very emotional time for me. I have created a large network of supporters and allies within law enforcement, within politics, and I turned to a lot of them for their support, and it was very disheartening what that response was. And I kind of felt like when we named it after two victims, that maybe there were some people out there that thought that by passing it, it was only ceremonial and it wasn't important, or that it only benefited two victims. So I kind of, asked that my dad's name be removed, and I recommended that they change the name to something that kind of encompassed the whole. I haven't seen what the name is yet, but I have been told that they're moving forward with it. And I still support it, and I will still rally around it and ask others to support it and call their state legislator and tell them that it's a good thing. But it was a very hard time for me. I mean, to have people that say they support you and then turn their back or not respond and kind of avoid you for nothing but political reasons, or because they didn't want to go against, somebody else, that's devastating. And I kind of needed a reset from that. So one of the ways to do that was to kind of separate myself a little bit.
What are the best ways to get in contact with Project Cold Case? So if someone is watching this and they're like, you know what, they want to learn more about your services, how can they get in contact?
Yeah, our website, projectcoldcase.org, is kind of the base camp for all the information. We do have social media, Facebook and Instagram are our most used. LinkedIn, though, is also there. And if you're a family out there that has not submitted your loved one, we don't just Google cold cases and then put them on our website. Like, this is advocacy, so we want to support families. You can go to our website, and in the top right corner, there's a link to submit your loved one, and you can complete that form, and somebody from our office will reach out, and we'll start providing advocacy and awareness. We have just very minimal criteria. The case be over a year old. It doesn't have to technically be cold or officially cold, but if it's been over a year, we'll add it to our platform. It has to be ruled a homicide because we are not investigators, so we can't take suspicious and undetermined and suspicious suicides and do anything with those. We don't have that capability. And then if it's a missing person, we want the families that we help to kind of separate and believe that their loved one is no longer alive, just because there are other resources available for missing persons that are believed to still be alive and out there. So, and a family member, you have to be related, and you don't have to be blood related if you are a fiance or a cousin or but
someone close to the victim in some way.
Very close, yeah. Then they can submit, and we will reach out and we will help how we can.
Wonderful. Is there anything you want to add about the topic that you think I didn't cover before we wrap things up?
No, I think we're good. I think, I would just encourage people to remember that, for us, for Project Cold Case, the bar for success is not always a solve. Mm-hmm. I mean, ultimately, that's our goal for all these cases, for families to get answers, but that's out of our control. So what we focus on is the things we can control, which is that support and long-term advocacy, whether the case gets solved, if it doesn't get solved, if it's moving through the judicial process after an arrest, we'll stay with those families throughout that process. And I think, sometimes people, again, I always ask people, what does justice look like to you? Because there's lots of different forms of justice, and it seems to be different for everybody. And if your goal of justice is a death penalty, you may not get that. And so just being aware of what that looks like, and then being respectful of what it looks like to other people.
Perfect. Well, Ryan Backmann, Project Cold Case, thank you for joining us here on First Coast News Plus for our stream. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Katie.